All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick are doing a preview and prediction for the 2023 CFP National Championship game between TCU and Georgia. Healthy line of 13 in favor of the Bulldogs. 63 is the over-under. Monday, January 9th will be the date of this one. 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN, live from SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, California. Georgia leads the series 4-0 all time. Last meeting coming in the Liberty Bowl back in 2016. Look at this TCU offense, Nick. This is a unit that's gotten them here. 41.1 points per game this season, 474 yards total. They have tremendous balance, and I think they really impressed against Michigan. What they were able to do on the ground, more importantly, against a defense that we touted as a physical defense, but they did not perform very well. Keandre Miller was doing very well before he got hurt. We'll have to monitor his status. He had 8 carries for 57 yards. Imari DiMarcado, another senior, though, he came in and he spelled him very well. 17 carries, 150 yards. Michigan could not contain this ground attack for TCU. I think it was very impressive to see what they did on the ground, led by an offensive line that has great size on the interior. Guard Steve Avila leads the way for them there. I also thought Brandon Coleman performed very well this season. Alan Ollie at center. I mean, this is a big offensive line. They have some great size. They're going to go against the Georgia defense here that is the nation's top-ranked run defense. We'll get to some of their struggles in the secondary that TCU is going to certainly look to exploit. And I think they can with a deep trio of pass catchers led by Quentin Johnston, who is one of the most talented guys entering the upcoming draft. 1,066 yards and 6 touchdowns. He's been great the last 2 games for TCU. You also got Tay Barber and Darius Davis, 2 fellow seniors. And then Savion Williams also plays very well for him. And then Jared Wiley's a red zone threat as well for TCU. This is going to be an interesting game, Nick, because obviously they can do damage through the air. Max Duggan, Heisman finalist, Davey O'Brien, award winner, 3,500 yards, 32 touchdowns. He's also done great work as a runner, 461 yards and 8 touchdowns. But they're going to want to run the football. That's where it starts for TCU. And if they can't do that here in this game, it might be a long day for the Horned Frogs.
Certainly agree. I think TCU needs to find a very strong pulse on the running game to kick off against Georgia here, considering the strength that Georgia has in the running defense. It's going to be an interesting matchup to watch. I like this TCU offense a lot. There is some serious talent here. Max Duggan has turned into a bona fide superstar. A great player, a great personality in college football. I think we need more guys like him in the sport. Laid back, kind of fun personalities. Great season for him. 3,500 yards passing. 32 touchdowns through the air, 6 interceptions, 63.7% completion percentage. Looked good against Michigan. Felt like he was ready for the moment. It's a big moment, right, for TCU. This is huge. This was huge playing against Michigan, right? In the playoff, getting that chance. Sonny Dykes' squad, and Duggan, lived up to the moment. He was comfortable. He looked ready to go, slang the ball around, and they also ran the ball, which was very helpful. Keandre Miller, as long as he's healthy, he's a star back and can really hit you in so many different ways. I like the speed he has. He can make good cuts. Nearly 1,400 yards on the season, plus the 17 scores on the ground. DiMarcado as well is not a bad back. The number 2 back with 6 scores. Duggan has 8 on the ground as well, so he certainly has some running threat. It's not as much as maybe Stetson Bennett's running threat, but he also does have that ability to use his legs. I like Quentin Johnston a whole lot. Tay Barber as well, a fun wide receiver. Johnson, fantastic for the over 1,000 yards receiving and the 6 touchdowns for him. Jared Wiley, I like the threat in the end zone as a tight end. You can hit him in the corner, find a good touchdown here and there. I like this offense. I think they have potential for some points. Secondary from Georgia that really had a terrible night against Ohio State. We're going to touch on that in a few minutes. But this is a fun, high-flying offense that puts up a ton of yards and a ton of points.
You look at TCU, though, this is an offense that I said was going to earn respect, win or lose against Michigan. I think they certainly earned some respect. It was really done on the ground, though, through the air. They were not all that good. They certainly struggled against a very good Michigan secondary. Duggan only completed 48% of 29 attempts for 225 yards. 76 of those came off one play to Quentin Johnston. And one big area that allowed this TCU passing attack to thrive is that Jesse Minter for Michigan blitzed very often. It doesn't matter if they're running or throwing the ball. They really were able to take advantage of some of these blitzes. That's not something that Kirby Smart and Georgia is going to look to employ, I don't think, too often, especially when they watch the film from the Fiesta Bowl. I kind of want to get your thoughts on this unit that, again, is full of veterans, seniors at every single position, 2 deep. They're loaded with experience, which is going to be massive, including a 4-year starter at quarterback in Duggan. He was a complete gamer. He was really impressed this year through the air. But what kind of matchup are you looking to see here? Because, again, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of blitzes considering what Michigan was doing. Jesse Minter was going cover 0, and they were just running backside, and they were winning the battle with the line of scrimmage, and that allowed them just to run it right at them downhill with ease. That's not going to be the game plan here against Georgia. I think they're just going to, attack with 3 or 4 down linemen. And just what do you think they can do to kind of keep this balance, this defense off balance, that is? Because I think Sonny Dykes, this is a complete chess match here against Kirby Smart because they're going to look to employ a different variety of schemes and plays here to try and throw this defensive line for Georgia off balance, because when the defensive line's not doing the heavy lifting, Georgia struggles.
I'll be the first one to say I didn't think Michigan's game plan on defense was the worst idea. They got after the quarterback on a few different occasions. There were a couple of sacks where Duggan was hit blindside, wasn't really able to see the play. So I think the full, the blitz package was not a bad idea necessarily, but I think Georgia is going to avoid that. I think Georgia likes what it has on the defensive line, likes what it has in its linebacking, core over there. I think they're going to try and use that to their advantage. I like TCU to try to hit Georgia through the air. I want to see a good balance. But I think throwing through the air when you can, finding those passing lanes and hitting the ball early through the air, maybe throwing on first down, second down, especially if they're behind the chains. I think they can use that opportunity. Georgia's secondary did not look good. There were some serious stars who really kind of struggled against Ohio State. I think Sonny Dykes going to try and draw up a pass first kind of game plan, even though they do have such talented running backs. But I think if you're able to kind of catch Georgia off guard, hit that balance through the air, and then hit the ground when you need to, and kind of pick up those big, 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6 on the ground, I think it's very possible for TCU.
Now, again, this Georgia offense, remember when the committee first did their rankings, I believe Ohio State got the nod over Georgia, which I thought was complete nonsense. And the reason they said that was because Ohio State's offense was exciting. When you look at the stat sheet, though, Georgia's was just as good, just not as exciting. And I think that was really, something that a lot of people didn't really notice with Georgia is this offense is good. No, they don't really have first-round pass catchers, and they don't throw it around the yard like Ohio State does. But 39.4 points per game, almost 500 yards per game. They have tremendous balance. This Georgia offense is good. Maybe they'll eventually get their credit. Stetson Bennett was not very good against Ohio State. Had 398 passing. Did lead the game-winning drive there late in that game, so credit is certainly due there. But even his head coach was highly critical of him. They even shut him down at the end of that first half where he almost threw an interception that really could have turned this game upside down for the Bulldogs. Bennett did not deal with pressure very well. Again, all in all, he was able to get the job done for this offense, but Bennett really struggled for the most part. The one thing that this offense really does well is they run the football, but against Ohio State, I thought they were just going to continue to run it right down their throat there in that second half, but they really struggled on first downs to run it, so they went with a more pass-heavy attack, which they did a lot of that in that first quarter as well. They're running the ball very well. They just were not very committal to it. 135 yards. That's one of the lowest marks on the year for Georgia. And the other totals were in blowouts against Stanford, Oregon, Tennessee, so it really didn't matter. But this is a run game. They're very good. They have a strong rotation of backs. Kendall Milton, Dejon Edwards, Kenny McIntosh. These guys all have 500-plus yards. They only get about 10 touches per game because they rotate so well. So this is the healthiest backfield in the nation. But I was shocked to see them not look to run the ball more, Nick, because they had only 26 carries, which equates to over 5 yards per touch. They were, I thought, winning the battle at the line of scrimmage for the most part of that game. In the second half, not so much, though. And they seemed to abandon the run when it stopped working on first downs. And that almost cost this football team, I thought, ended up working out in the end. But Bennett, he's going to have to be better in this game. 3,800 yards, 23 touchdowns on the year, 8 rushing touchdowns as well, 4 total touchdowns in that semifinal game. What do you think TCU is going to do here to try and bottle up Bennett? Because he's shown that he's not that great under pressure. He got sacked a handful of times, made a handful of bad decisions, got away with a handful of bad mistakes. They really could have hurt this football team. What do you think is going to be the game plan in this one? Because TCU, they looked very good against the run against Michigan, which was also very shocking.
During the first quarter, Stetson Bennett had a bad interception against Ohio State. Just really did not read the route at all. Whoever he was targeting just did not quite throw it where he needed to. Could picked off bad interception. That looked like that could really cost Georgia, and he knew it immediately. He could see in his reaction it was a bad interception. Bennett struggled under pressure last night. It's certainly no joke there. The pressure was getting to him. They were putting pressure on him. They got a couple sacks. They got him in the pocket. He looked uncomfortable really into the end of the game when that final 2 drives there, when they kind of started hitting the passing lanes. I think another big reason was they were not targeting Brock Bowers early on at halftime. He had 1 reception for 17 yards. They needed to target Brock Bowers more, in my opinion, and they started to do that towards the end of the game. He got a few more catches, some big plays here and there. Bowers is their biggest weapon, an important weapon. I like the running back duo here. I like the running back on the ground. They had some big gains on the ground. They could have had that touchdown if one for the turf that knocked out their running back there, which was a pretty funny play when you look at it. So I think that they should stick with the running game if they're going to try and attack this TCU defense. This TCU defense is not fantastic. They're not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but they did give up a ton of points to Michigan, and it's certainly possible Georgia can score a ton of points against this defense. McIntosh and Edwards and Milton, splitting the carries here. I like to see them continue to do that. I think they have a really good balance with those 3 backs. All 3 of them have different strengths and different skill sets, so I'd like to see them kind of spread the love out there on the ground. I do think they need to target Brock Bowers more in this game. He is their leading receiver on the season, but he did not get, like I said, a lot of targets against Ohio State, which I thought was a bit interesting of a game plan decision. Lab McConkey as well. I like to see what they can do targeting him.
Brock Bowers did end the game with 4 receptions for 64 yards, some pretty big plays for him down the stretch. They're definitely going to look to utilize him a little bit more. You have to check the stats of Darnell Washington. He left, I believe, an ankle sprain early in that semifinal game. A.D. Mitchell coming back was big for them. 3 grabs, 43 yards, and the game-winning touchdown. This is a team that loves to attack you on the edge. That jailbreak screen, Nick, I've been saying it for years, is very lethal for Georgia. That's, the staple of their offense. And they don't pull it out often, but when they do, it seems to go for a touchdown every time. They pull it out inside the 30 or usually inside the red zone. And I'm very interested to see how that will work against TCU, because I expect it to be called at least once or twice, and that's a secondary that's plenty of athleticism. Same with that linebacker. Georgia, they just have so much size at tight end and some athletes that it's very well designed, very well blocked. We'll see what happens though. Ad McContney, he was also a little beat up, so he was very quiet in that semifinal game. This is a receiving core. They get a handful of different guys involved. Dominic Blaylock, Kyrus Jackson, Arian Smith. Whenever he's on the field, he seems to make a big 40 or 50-yard grab with his speed. It's unfortunate he's not been more healthy in his career at Georgia. But this is an offensive line, Nick. They did not win Joe Moore Award, which I thought they probably should have. They're just incredibly physical. You look at guys like Warren Erickson, Tate Rutledge on the interior, and Broderick Jones. He's likely to be a first-rounder. And Amarius Mims, he's also been very, very good. This is an offensive line that is phenomenal, Nick. They're also very good on third down, one of the top third down offenses in the country, but they were not good against Ohio State. 2 of 10 on third. That is unheard of with this offense that averages 49.7% conversion rate on the money down. How do you think this Georgia offense is going to look now that they have a week? They're going to have a week to prepare and look at the film. Because even though they put up 500-plus yards and Bennett was able to wheel them to a victory, this offense just something seemed out of touch for the most part of the game against Ohio State till they're late in the fourth quarter. They scored 18 points.
The offense certainly looked out of sync against Ohio State. 2 of 10 on third down is just uncharacteristically low for a Kirby Smart coach team. You really expect a lot more out of his offense. This is a very disciplined team that can convert on third down, nearly 50% on the season. So that number is kind of jarring when you look at it. They really struggled, especially in that first half. There were a lot of drives that just fell apart that should not have fallen apart. And they found themselves in a big hole. And I really thought Ohio State had potential to pull away, but Georgia finds a way back in. Stetson, I was impressed with the final drive, showed that he is a leader there, made some good plays, especially that end zone throw for the game winner. Fantastic, great pass to his wideout in the end zone. I really like what I saw there. I think they got to target Brock Bowers a ton. I think Brock Bowers is a physical mismatch against this TCU defense. I think he has the best potential to make a big play. I'd like to see Ladd McConkey involved in a couple of jet sweeps, maybe do something involving with him in the backfield or throw to him on first and second down. I like what McConkey can do. Yes, he's a little banged up. I think with about 9 days time, he can kind of recover, get fully healthy, get ready to go for that. And don't abandon the running game. You got to run on first down, in my opinion. This is running back trio that we're talking about that is very talented. And at times, they looked like they were just shy to run it, which is a really weird thing to see out of this Georgia offense.
Now we're going to look at a TCU defense. This is a very interesting game they just had here against Michigan, Nick. I think they played very well against the run. They only got 186 yards to Michigan. They dominated that offensive line that was pegged as the nation's best. 113 of those yards came on 3 runs. The first run of the game, Donovan Edwards went for 50-plus. Then J.J. McCarthy later on the game did an entire drive with his legs. And that's really where all that yardage came from. They completely dominated. Despite giving up 45 points, I thought this defense played the best game of the year. They were consistently in the backfield. They had 13 tackles for loss. Dylan Horton, defensive end, had 4 sacks. It was absurd how they were able to eat these linebackers. And in the secondary, throughout the year, praised them on how much athleticism they had, how much speed, how much talent those 2 units had. And they put it all together in this game. That was a season high by far. Not once this year did they hit double-figure tackles for loss. They did that in this game. And they're going to have to do that one more time against Georgia, a team that's going to look to do the same thing. They're going to look to impose physicality and run the football. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can do that. D. Winters at linebacker, game of his life, had a pick 6, 3 of those TFLs, 7 sacks. He was the player of the game. You look at this defensive line, though, that was not very productive throughout the year. That was one of the knocks I had on them. Got Dominic Williams, one of those freshmen. I believe he's 6'2", 320, true freshman. And he played very well. He was helping lead the penetration in the middle. Tymon Mitchell, another one of those guys. These guys all stepped up, Nick. It was very shocking to see because all year long the defensive line was not very impactful, and they were eating up this great defensive line. So I think there's a lot of positives here for TCU in this game against Michigan, despite giving up those 45 points in their secondary. They were playing ahead the entire game, so Michigan was throwing it a lot. And, the secondary, they're full of playmakers. They're full of guys that, like Jim Thorpe Award winner Tre'Vius Hodges-Tomlinson. Bud Clark has 5 picks, including a pick 6. That's another thing I should add. They had all those tackles for losses and sacks, but they also had 2 pick 6s, Nick. So I think this was the best game of the year for their defense. They did give up 342, and they really struggled to cover through the middle of the field. But that's been, a consistent thing this year with TCU is they've not been able to cover very well when it comes to allowing big plays, but they are still 8th nationally in a 54% opponent completion rating. And those ball skills, you can rave about it. There's so many playmakers in this back end. Mark Perry coming over, he's been great for them from Colorado. Outside of Hodges Tomlinson, Josh Newton, these guys both have 3 interceptions each. They both have double-figure pass breakups. And then, of course, the aforementioned Bud Clark. Millard Bradford, I think, has been very good for them also. This is a pretty deep secondary, Nick. Johnny Hodges, Jamoy Hodges, those guys have also been really good in the middle of this defense. What do you expect from them against Georgia here? Because it's a very similar style of offense with a little bit more physicality. But again, despite the 45 points, I thought that was the best game I've seen from this defense all year long.
It certainly was. The 45 points could look jarring, but actually the defense played pretty well. I like the way they were able to get after J.J. McCarthy. A lot of tackles for loss, a lot of pressure, and a couple sacks. The 2 pick sixes are fantastic on the stat sheet. Whenever your defense gets some points for you, 14 points from the defense is a fantastic number. I'm sure Sonny Dykes is absolutely pleased with that. Johnny Hodges, great linebacker, leader on this team. 81 total tackles, good season for him. D. Winters had a great night with the 3 TFLs. He has 7.5 sacks in the season, 72 total tackles. Great player. I love what he can do. Good leader. Gets after the quarterback. Good pressure from him. I think that's a key to this. Can he get after Stetson Bennett and make him uncomfortable? Certainly think it's possible. Millard Bradford, another fantastic player. Had a great night. 8 total tackles against Michigan, 2 tackles for a loss. Dylan Horton had 4 tackles for a loss and 6 total. So I think this defense is getting better throughout the season. There were some question marks preseason about this defense, whether they could keep up. I think their stats, aren't terrible. 25 points allowed per game, 385 yards allowed total. You want to see maybe a little less there, but this is a good defense that's getting better. Matchup here, I like this secondary against this Georgia wide receiving core. I think it certainly is a possibility the secondary has a good day. And this TCU defense has gotten better over time. I think they have a good chance here against an offense that looked like it was totally out of sorts against Ohio State.
And again, it's a very similar style of offense. They're going to run the football, play action. Some of the pass catchers, they're not going to be first-round picks in the NFL or anything. So it's a very similar style they're going to be playing here. J.J. McCarthy called out their 3-3-5 scheme, and they took that to heart. They really slowed down that run game. They got in the backfield often. D. Winters especially against the run, Hodges as well, timing up their blitzes into the run lanes was perfect. That's something Ohio State struggled with. Georgia wasn't exactly able to exploit it that often, but Ohio State was completely out of sync on defense. Their linebackers were clueless at times. They could not hit the right holes. I think that's not something TCU is going to struggle here with as much, especially with how they played against Michigan. So, top to bottom, how do you think this defense will do? Because obviously that's the big criticism of this football team is the defense. I've even been highly critical at times, but they force turnovers. And again, they have athletic playmakers in the middle and in the back end that can really change this game around, especially at corner, having the Jim Thorpe Award winner. And he's not even the best player on the defense. I think D. Winters is. So what do you think is going to happen here? Because again, I think they're going to take what McCarthy said to heart, and they're going to continue to ride that all the way to LA.
I think there are some serious athletes on the defense. I think they'll hold Georgia to a few more points than some people expect. I think they have potential to get some turnovers here. Stetson Bennett, if you get some happy feet early on in the game, potentially throws a bad pick or two. It's certainly possible that happens early on. I like the leaders on this defense. I like the size some of these guys have. Really serious athletes. We've been critical of the defense all year. I think they had a good showing against Michigan. I think they have a good potential here against this offense that looked out of sorts. I think they have a good chance to have a good day. The offense did not look good for Georgia. We keep saying that, and think that this could be a big chance for TCU's defense to step up early on and make some plays.
Especially in the secondary, 16 interceptions on the season. That's going to leave you to a Georgia defense, Nick. This is a unit that I think is very good, especially on the defensive front. Jalen Carter is a strong run stopper. He was impactful when he was on the field for Georgia, but when he wasn't, he was gassed. He was on the sideline. And that's something we've seen last year with Jordan Davis. He's on the field and he's destroying interior offensive lines, but when he's not, they certainly struggle a good bit because his impact is certainly felt as a first-team All-American. I picked Ohio State to beat Georgia because I thought their secondary would get throttled. I was very interested to see how they would play back in the SEC title game against LSU and that talented receiving core. They did not pass the test, allowed 500-plus yards in that one. And Ohio State did exactly what I said they would against the Bulldogs. 348 and 4 touchdowns. C.J. Stroud was completely locked in, completely carried this football team, probably the best game of his career. They could not cover these talented pass catchers. Now, TCU possesses the same threat. They're not as deep, but Quentin Johnston is likely going to be the top receiver taken in the draft. And they also have 2 more seniors in Davis and Barber that have played a ton of football. So this is a very similar style of offense that they've not done very well against the last 2 games. They had almost 4 weeks to prepare for Ohio State, and they still got throttled. They could not get a lot of pressure. They have had 4 sacks in each of the last 3 games. I still think they lack an edge presence. Michael Williams had a handful of pressures in that game. But for the most part, they're having the mix and match. Corner blitzes, inside linebacker blitzes. They're finding ways to create pressure. So even though I did give them that criticism of not having an edge rusher since Nolan Smith went down, it's certainly not that big of a deal for a team like Georgia because they're finding ways to get creative. So I certainly think you're going to see some of that here. But Keely Ringo's been a liability in coverage. Christopher Smith, 58 tackles, 3 picks. He's certainly having a great year all around, but he was not great in coverage in that game. Malachi Starks gave up a touchdown. He's been very inconsistent this year. This is a very well-coached secondary, Nick. They're not going to fall for some trickery or anything like that, but they certainly do struggle to cover at times, especially against these better athletes. The theme of Georgia the last couple of years, their defense is great, only giving up about 15 points per game, less than 300 yards per contest, 79.9 rushing yards per game. That's far and away the first in FBS. I think this is the 4th year in a row they're top 3 against the run. But when this defensive line is not doing the heavy lifting, they struggle in the secondary. That is a consistent theme, and they have a lot of size they have to go against with TCU's offensive front. What makes me think anything's going to be any different here compared to how it's been the last 2 games, considering they've been getting torn apart? This defensive line's not been able to really take over games like they should.
I've been disappointed with the defensive line recently. The secondary has also disappointed me. Keely Ringo really disappointed me. He looked totally lost out there. Got beat on a few different plays. See more than him. Malachi Starks got beat for a touchdown badly too. The secondary, you expect a lot of it. Great coach team, and they just seem to struggle. Got lost on different plays. Ohio State really showed there are vulnerabilities in the secondary. I think Max Duggan and Sonny Dykes will certainly game plan for that. The front 7, Jalen Carter is fantastic on the defensive line, but you're right. He gets tired very easily. He's not a 3-down player. Certainly cannot be out there all the time. He gets winded. And when he is out there, the impact certainly is felt. He plugs those running holes fantastically, but if he's not there, that's a problem for this defense. I look at a couple guys on this defense, like Samal Mundon. He had a great game, right? He had a good season overall, leading team in tackles. Had a good game. Had a sack, I believe, against Michigan. So he's against Ohio State. I apologize. And there's some serious talent here. Obviously, this is Georgia defense that we questioned to coming into the season. Would they be able to live up to the expectations of the defense last season, considering how much they replaced and reloaded? This defense looked good in a lot of the games. A lot of talent here. But Ohio State had its way in the first half. C.J. Stroud was able to pick his passes, find his players, and create what he wanted to do. And I think that's a big opportunity for Max Duggan to kind of do the same thing. Pick his passes, find his players, create the plays he wants to make, and it's certainly possible.
Now, Ismail Mundon did have a sack against Ohio State. That was his first of the year, as did Jamon Dumas-Johnson. He has 1 in that game. And before that, his only other sack was against Tennessee. He has 4 on the year, but he has 2 of his sacks against these high-powered offenses. Do you smell desperation from Kirby Smart and Will Muschamp as they continue to have to get production from their inside linebackers? And then Javon Bullard is also a very good blitzing corner as well from this slot position. 7 tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks. He also had 1 as well against Ohio State. Do you smell desperation because they lack that outside edge presence, or is this just Georgia's way of being creative? Or, how are you kind of analyzing that? And when I say desperate, do they feel like they cannot hold up in the back end? That's why they're sending these other guys from all different spots.
I think they certainly feel like they can't hold up in the back end, which is why they're sending guys in. It definitely is interesting to see how they kind of send these guys in. Bullard coming in from the defensive back, Mundon and Dumas-Johnson coming in at linebacking. I think it's certainly a possibility that this defense is a little worried, and they're kind of have to get a little creative here because they are desperately worried about the pressure they're able to put on the quarterback. I think creativity more of the fact that it's a necessary creativity. If they can't create these type of plays, they're going to struggle to get pressure on the quarterback.
And now Javon Bullard, he has been very good in the slot this year, but the slot fade has been something he's struggled to contain. So we'll see what they can do, TCU that is, to exploit that. Top to bottom, though, it's a very good defense, but this is certainly a weak point for them is when their defensive line is not taking over games. They do struggle, but again, they're still one of the top. They are the nation's best run defense, that is, led by Jalen Carter. Looking at team comparisons, Nick, team edge 4-year starter Max Duggan, Stenson Bennett having a great year, Heisman finalist as well. But I'll take the Davey O'Brien Award winner here due to his skill set and his experience. Running back, Georgia, nation's best running back core, in my opinion. Wide receiver for TCU, Quentin Johnston, top pass catcher in the country, talent-wise. He leads them in a very senior-led unit. Next 3, I'm going to give the Georgia. The offensive line's terrific. I think it's the nation's best defensive line, led by Carter. It's more of a rotational unit. Guys like Nazir Stackhouse get involved. So Carter's the lone standout, but it's a very strong rotational unit. They wreak havoc is what they do. That's how they've been coached the last couple of years. Nation's best, one of the nation's best defensive lines, that is. Linebacker as well. I love what TCU has, but I think Dumas-Johnson, Ismail Mundon, what they've been able to do. in the middle was a little bit more impactful, even though D. Winters by himself could probably give both of those guys a run for his money. And he's certainly going to hear the noise this week. He's probably not going to get as much respect as these Georgia defenders, so I think he'll have a big game. And in the secondary, TCU with their playmaking and, again, ranking top 10 nationally in opponent completion rating allowed. When you compare these rosters top to bottom, Nick, clearly Georgia has an edge in terms of talent. But I think TCU, the way they've played this year and then how they match up in this game is quite favorable. They finally earned some respect. How many people do you think will give them respect when it comes to pairing up these rosters? Do you agree with these or do you disagree?
I like the comparisons for the most part. I think the linebacking core I'm going to give to TCU. I think that there is some serious talent, and D. Winters is just a fantastic linebacker, and I love what he can do. When you add in Johnny Hodges as well, I think that's going to give the edge for me. I think we're going to see the media give a lot of love to Georgia during the build-up to this game, and certainly, kind of expected. Georgia does deserve this, but I think that TCU, some of the talent is getting slept on. Duggan is a fantastic quarterback, definitely the more talented quarterback on the field for this matchup. I think the secondary, TCU's secondary, has continued to impress me week in, week out. They've gotten better and better, and it's really what I'd like to see from this improvement. The linebacking core as well. I'm going to take TCU on this one. I think Georgia does have the overall talent edge, which is why I think they have the best chance to win this game. But I think people in the media will certainly underestimate TCU's talent, just like they did against Michigan. People underestimated TCU's talent, and we saw it firsthand against Michigan in the Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah, despite me picking Michigan to win TCU, I wouldn't be shocked one bit if they win this game. I gave them a lot of credit. I felt this was a very good football team. Leads us to the final thoughts and the prediction. Keys to the game for TCU. The linebackers must continue to fill those run lanes like they did against Michigan, play with energy in the secondary. I think they just need to carbon copy what they did against the Wolverines and they'll have a good shot in this one. For UGA, establish physicality up front. They also need to be more committal to the run because I felt like they potentially would have probably won that game by double figures if they would have just committed to the run and, drain clock a little bit more. Who knows what would have happened. Generate more consistent pressure as well because against Ohio State, they certainly had those 4 sacks and they had a good bit of pressure. Stroud was able to work some magic, and Duggan is certainly capable of that himself. He is a gamer like we've seen before, but it needs to be a little bit more consistent. Prediction for me, I'm going to take Georgia to win this one by 7. I'll probably be rooting for TCU. I love the underdog story. 2 touchdown underdogs basically coming into this one. And like I said, Nick, their secondary had 4 weeks to prepare for Ohio State. They failed the test. They have maybe, 9 days here to get prepared for TCU. What makes me think anything's going to be different? And do you think it will be different in the secondary, which would lead to a Georgia victory?
I think the secondary will struggle, which is why this game will be a lot closer than I think some people expected. I don't foresee Georgia covering the 13-point line. I think there's just no way that happens. I think this game will be a 1-score game. Due to the struggles in the secondary, Keely Ringo have been an absolute liability against Ohio State. I think he'll have an equally poor game. Disappointing considering how talented he is. I think Max Duggan has the best potential here to tear apart this defense in the secondary. Love his opportunity to kind of sling the ball around here. Got to have a lot of energy, this TCU offense. I think they will have that. They're going to be hyped for this game. Their fans are going to be excited for this game. I don't blame them. This is certainly an exciting matchup. A great chance in the national championship game. I think Georgia gets the job done simply because they do have that physicality up front, and they do have that size on the interior, which is just certainly hard to do to kind of fight against. I think TCU will have to throw the ball a lot because they will not be able to run the ball, which certainly could play into their advantage considering how we've suggested that they're running the offense. Throwing it will be the best chance for success. I like UGA here. I think they have the best chance to win this game, but it certainly is going to be close, and I'm excited to see what TCU can do. They're on the national stage. They're in the national title game. They've earned this opportunity. There's certainly no doubt in my mind, and here's a big chance.
Yeah, TCU certainly doesn't have the size on the defensive line to really match up that well. They didn't really phase them against Michigan, so we'll see what happens. I think that's why this game's tougher to predict is because no one expected them to look that good in the trenches against Michigan, and they did, so this is a much harder game to pick. Yeah, like you said, I think TCU would not be shocked one bit if they win this game. They've earned it here. It's going to be fun. I think fast start for TCU is going to be something to monitor. I mean, this year, even if they start slow, it really hasn't bothered them. They've had to come from behind numerous times this year. So regardless if they're down by a couple of points or up a couple of points, I think TCU, they're going to have their hands full regardless. I'm going to be rooting for them to win this game, but I think Georgia, they're definitely going to be able to run the ball a little bit better than Michigan did, and that's going to lead to a victory for them. But I think this would be a good game. Just like we both said, both playoff games would be very good. We were not disappointed one bit. Expectations were more than met. They were exceeded in that one. I think this will be a close game here. And like you said, Bulldogs will not cover.
Yeah, I'm absolutely excited for this one. Really cannot wait to see how this wraps up the college football season. I think both these teams are extremely talented. TCU, fantastic story all season. Sonny Dykes, man, what a turnaround he has with this program. I'm excited for this game. This should be a lot of fun, and I think it's going to be a lot closer than people expect, and we can see what TCU can do.
It's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Appreciate tuning in. Nick, as always, thank you.
Absolutely. Looking forward to this one.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.